It's really cool to be able to produce this thing that is now out in the world. And if you're good at it, you could make money doing this. The thing that is going to bring probably money and profit and success to you is the ability to turn research and interviews, if your podcast includes interviews, into a great story. That's a skill that I think is sorely lacking in many, many places in the world that are doing amazing work, but they just don't know a way to put the story out there so that real people can understand it.
Welcome to PodBiz, the money behind the mic, where we get into the business of podcasting. I'm Norma Jean Belenky, a podcast and media strategist, specializing in marketing and audience development.
And I'm John Kiernan. I'm a podcast producer, and we're asking the question that's on everyone's mind. Where is the money in podcasting?
Each week, we talk to podcast industry professionals, marketers, and creators who are turning podcasts into a thriving business and making the industry what it is today.
With real revenue, real strategies, and real results.
If you're looking to grow or scale your show, and of course monetize, you're in the right place.
So let's get down to PodBiz.
Today we're speaking with Laura Joyce Davis, CEO of Narrative Podcasts and managing editor of the Stanford Storytelling Project. We'll be speaking about the power of narrative podcasts and how to monetize them, how she went from a self-taught podcaster in the pandemic to teaching podcasting at Stanford, and how those skills apply to different areas of your life that you can then further monetize. Let's get down to PodBiz. Today, we're joined by Laura Joyce Davis, CEO of Narrative Podcasts and managing editor at the Stanford Storytelling Project. Welcome to PodBiz.
Thank you, Norma Jean. It's great to be here.
Let's get straight to it. Where's the money in podcasting?
So, you know me, Norma Jean. So I was thinking about this question and I was sort of chuckling to myself because generally one of the first things I tell my students is if you want to make money, there are better ways to do it than start a podcast, easier ways to do it, which is not to say that you can't do it, of course.
Get into real estate.
Yeah. No, but actually something that I've thought a lot about, especially during the last 3 years that I've been at Stanford, is how the things that I'm teaching students, yes, they're learning to make, story-driven, narrative, research-driven podcast episodes. But really what they're learning is a skill that is going to serve them well in anything they do in life. And I think the reason that I've thought about this particularly at Stanford is most of my students are not going to go on to be podcasters. Like that's not why they're taking my class because they're there as computer science students or, some STEM profession that they're going into where they probably will make a lot of money because they'll have a Stanford degree and they'll be in CS or whatever.
Yeah,
it's STEM. And so, here, there in Silicon
Valley.
I'm
a biomedical engineer that studied at Stanford and I took this fun podcasting class.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But my class fulfills one of their requirements, their writing and speaking requirements. And so it's a very different environment than, in my narrative podcasting classes. Those people are podcast professionals, generally speaking. Like they are people who are going to go on and do this for many years to come, hopefully. And so I talk a lot with my students about, look, what we're doing here. Yes, it's really cool to be able to produce this thing that is now out in the world. And if you're good at it, you could make money doing this. But especially in narrative podcasting, where we're such a niche to begin with, the thing that you're really learning that is going to bring, probably money and profit and success to you is the ability to turn research and interviews, if your podcast includes interviews, into a great story. And that's a skill that I think is sorely lacking in many, many places in the world that are doing amazing work, but they just don't know a way to put the story out there so that real people can understand it. And the best example I can think of that is one of the classes that I just wrapped up. It's my spring class, is a class called Stories to Save Our Planet. And so my students, they have a very specific project in that class, which is they have to go find some climate change solution that is actually in the world right now, go interview the people who are experts about that, and then do a bunch of research. They actually write a narrative essay that really writes out that research, so they thought through it. And then they turn that into a 10 to 15 minute podcast story. And so they're really translating often pretty technical, specific language or ideas into something that, my 13-year-old son could listen to and enjoy. And in fact, I often give him that example. It was like, look, you need to create something that is fact-checked and accurate and interesting, but also entertaining. Like, you need to have the skill of turning facts and figures into story. And that's something that it doesn't matter what you're selling or what you're trying to make money at. That skill is going to serve you well just in life, in, everything you do.
Absolutely. And I think for me, the podcast that's out there in the world that does this the best, in my opinion, would be like Radiolab, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I love Radiolab, of course.
Such a fan. It's like it's like the perfect combination of like nerd and narrative. Yep. And I mean, I think I've been listening for years and years, and I think it's something where when you're able to tell a story using data, it helps bring a little bit of authority to the story. It makes it more real. And I think when you add that storytelling element to data, it helps people remember it. There's a lot of statistics out there about how when you share a fact within a story, people are like 10 times or 100 times more likely to remember it. So I think that's a really important aspect that you brought up, as well as the fact that that storytelling skill can really be applied to marketing, to asking for funding, right?
Exactly. Absolutely. Hugely. Yeah.
Yeah. To investor rounds and pitch decks and all that kind of stuff, which I know a lot of people in STEM are doing, especially in the VC venture capital and startup world as well. Biotech is huge if we're talking about, your science students, but I think it's also, teaching that skill of what is the story behind the information here is super important. And, I'd love to dig in next a little bit into your journey, because you really went from self-taught podcaster to teaching podcasting at Stanford.
Yeah. No, I know it's pretty wild.
It's wild.
Yeah, it is.
And you have your own company as well. Like you were saying, with Narrative Podcasts, which is the name of your company. You teach people on a professional level, right? It's like people who are going to go out there and create podcasts within the professional space. Maybe it's B2B, maybe it's B2C, maybe they have their own business, maybe they're, selling advertising, all that kind of stuff. So you're really doing it on multiple levels within different demographics. You're teaching that storytelling skill.
Yeah. So, okay, the origin story. I love the origin story for anybody, not just me. It's such a fun question.
The origin story. Dun, dun, dun.
So my origin story begins on a day that many listeners might remember, March 16th, 2020. And in the Bay Area, at least, we learned that we were going into lockdown the very next day.
Yeah.
And I have 3 children. At the time, they were very young. They were 3, 6, and 8 at the time. So little kids. And I had just, for the first time in 8 years of parenting, gotten to a place in February of 2020 where I had my time back to write. That's my training. I started off as a writer. I have my MFA in fiction writing. And so I was kind of in this moment of like, I felt like I was finding myself again. I was writing again every day. All 3 kids were in some sort of school or childcare situation. And then the pandemic happened. And March 16th was the first day that my 3 kids were home. And it was not a good day. Let's just say not my best day of parenting. And I was freaking out a little bit. And my husband came home from work. And he took one look at me and he was like, why don't you go for a bike ride? And so I did. And I went up into the Oakland Hills, and I remember it was magic hour. And I remember feeling just like the weight of everything on my shoulders, not just the pandemic, but these 8 years of feeling pretty unfulfilled and just discouraged as a writer. Like, I love my children, but the world had sort of promised me that would be the thing that would fill me up. And I was finding myself very frustrated creatively and just in life. So I needed a lifeline. And as I was biking up into the Oakland Hills, I suddenly got this thought, and I was like, I'm going to start a podcast. It'll be called Shelter in Place. What a novel term. And which it was then.
It was. Yeah.
I thought, I'll do this 6 days a week. It'll be a daily podcast. I will just sit down, I'll write a script, I'll record it in one take, I'll press publish. The whole thing will take me about an hour. And ha ha ha, anybody who knows.
Yeah,
It's like the joke was on me.
And we'll come back to your story in a second. But when you're thinking, when everybody has that like $1 million ding ding light bulb above the head moment, I'll just start a podcast. It'll just take me an hour a day.
Yeah.
I think that it's wishful thinking, of course, like we all do. We're all sitting back here as, people who are seasoned podcasters or have professional experience within the industry, like, okay. But also, I think we need that optimism in order to start, to be honest.
Especially in that moment when the world was so crazy. So I thought I would do it for 2 weeks. I mean, that was the other reason that I was so optimistic, because I was like, the pandemic will be over in 2 weeks and then I can go back to normal. Yes. Again, we laugh. So long story short, that those 2 weeks turned into 200 episodes in about 2 years. And I think because my training is as a fiction writer, story has just always been a way that I approach anything that I do. And so I didn't know the term narrative podcast at that point, but that's what I was doing from the beginning, because that was just sort of how I was going to approach this thing. I knew how to write. I barely knew how to use my mic. I didn't know how to edit audio or do sound design or any of the things that I now teach students. And so I really just learned by doing, which I still think to this day is the absolute best way to learn how to do something. You really don't become an expert at something until you learn to do it yourself over and over and over and over again. And I shared with you before we got on this call, I'm working on a book for the University of Chicago Press right now, which is essentially like a narrative podcasting textbook, the fun kind of textbook though, like there'll be a lot of fun stuff in there. And it is really, it's step by step about every part of the podcast production process. But the overall theme of the book and the kind of narrative arc of this book is that all of the magic happens in the revision process. And it's actually in those moments of making mistakes and having to figure out how to fix those mistakes or pivot or do something different. That's where the good stuff is. That's where personal growth happens. That's where professional growth happens. And it's where the most interesting ideas come from. And so, kind of coming back to your original question about where's the money in this, I think in some ways, my answer to that is it's in the long game of this whole storytelling podcasting process. Like if you want to make money quickly, there are better ways to do that in the world, easier ways to do that. But if you want to actually grow and really understand who you are creatively and professionally and just like how you show up in the world, I don't know of a better way to do it than to go through the process of making a narrative podcast in particular, where there's just, you have to do so much work and so much revision to make something good. And that process is hard, but it's also kind of the best. It's where all of the good stuff happens.
That 10,000 hours of becoming an expert. I think Malcolm Gladwell. Yeah, yep. I think Malcolm Gladwell really, he was really onto something with Outliers. And, I think getting your hands really deep in a medium, whatever it is, right? Yeah. Especially a creative medium. And being able to have so much work under your belt that you can distinguish excellence from mediocrity.
Absolutely.
Is incredible, right? And within podcasting, I think we both had the opportunity to do that. And it's interesting to see how it shapes many areas of our lives, but also within podcasting, it's interesting to see how it shapes the work we make and also the work we market and how we market it. I mean, even for this show, our clip strategy, we love AI and we use it to some extent, but at the end of the day, to get really great clips with sound bites that are snappy, it's not one clip pulled by AI, it's expertise, right? And this is what I tell my clients as well, of that triangulation, right? Figure out what you want to say, figure out how you want to say it, and let the audio and the content drive you there instead of being content first and just kind of like taking this lump of a thing and putting a little bow on it. It's like, no, no, no. This is not an ice cream shop where you're going in and you're getting a scoop and they're putting it on a cone. No, no, no. This is like a Cold Stone situation. Or I don't know if like everybody listening or watching has seen, those other ice cream places where there's a slab, but you're getting a slab and you're getting toppings and there's some chopping
Have you
up
seen the
in.
roll one?
Yeah. No.
I just went to one of these
spend
places,
enough
so I have
doom
this in my brain.
scrolling to see those clips online, of course.
So cool.
I've never had one in person. You're going to have to tell me about it later. But, when you're making great content, right, and you're diving deep into that process of, creating something greater than the sum of its parts, this is not a scoop on a cone situation. This is a roly, choppy, Cold Stone, add your mix-ins situation at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah,
And so
I love that analogy.
Yeah. And I think speaking to, the work that you do and the work that you've taught yourself to do, that's such an important distinction, right? And anybody can do it, but you have to actually do it, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's really hard and it's really tedious.
It is. And it's a lot of being in that messy middle where you're like, is this ever going to be anything good? Or
is it ever going to end? Is it ever going to just like be a good thing?
Yeah.
And then you feel like a 5-year-old that just ate paste. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm loving these analogies so much.
It's like, is this real art or am I just covered in paste that I ate a bunch of? Like, what's going on? No, but that's what it's like, I think, especially on, the independent creator side, right? I meet so many independent creators, whether they're people I meet at conferences, people who want to work with me, clients, things like that. And they're like, is this good? How do I make this good? How do I get this to a professional level? And it's like, when you make art independently, when you make content outside of a professional studio, and even, we see it, there's less criticism the more professional you get, but it's still there. But there's always, I think, if you're an indie creator, and especially if you're a one-man band, right? Especially if you're on your own, you're a one-person podcast. If you're doing it on your own, there will always be that moment, until you start to get validation, until you get downloads, until you get ad dollars, till you get a network. There's always that moment of like being a 5-year-old kindergartner, like, how's my art? I ate a bunch of paste, but like, here it is, And so going from paste eater, right, to teaching at Stanford, I think in the middle of that, right, apart from flattening the curve, you really did the hard yards, right?
Yeah.
You put in the hard work and you gleaned so much wisdom out of that. And in between that, you started a company, right? You started Narrative Podcast, which is very cool. And you teach professionals how to podcast, and not as an elective course, maybe somebody who's studying STEM or who's getting an amazing degree at Stanford, but people who are like, I want to make money at this. I want to make a career out of this. I want to make money from my podcast. So tell us a little bit about that bridge in terms of, I think in terms of the technical aspects of it, but also in terms of your personal development, flipping it from I know this to I can teach this to I'm an expert and I'm a subject matter expert and I have something to say.
Yeah, that's a great question. It happened a little bit by accident in the beginning. I have, for many years before I was a podcaster, I was a running coach. And so I think that there's kind of like Coach Laura has always sort of been in anything that I do. And I think it took me a long time to realize that teaching is actually just coaching. It's, because I thought for a long time I didn't want to teach. But it was about halfway through season 2, Shelter in Place, the podcast. I mean, also the pandemic, but
it's a great podcast, by the way. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. No, it was a lot of fun to make and a lot of paste eating, as you said. But
I love that. We can coin that term now. Paste eater.
I think we should. I mean,
Okay,
have you heard
done.
about Chicken Bomb? Rob Rosenthal's Chicken Bomb. Go look up.
I think,
just
maybe.
look it up. Anybody who's listening, look it up. He actually made an episode about it recently on Sound School, his podcast. It's hilarious.
Yes.
But yeah, paste eating, Chicken Bomb. It can be the next Chicken Bomb.
Done.
So back to how this happened. It was about January of 2021, and I had started, I was making these weekly episodes. It went from daily for the first 100 episodes to weekly for the second 100. And I was starting to hear from other people in the industry, and specifically a lot of women and non-binary folks who were trying to break into the industry. Some of them even had some skills to begin with, but they couldn't get the internship, even like the free internships. They couldn't get anything because at that time, especially, it was so competitive to get anything, to get real training. And so I started to hear from folks who were like, hey, I'm listening. And I was very open on shelter in place that I was learning as I was doing this, and that was sort of part of the narrative of that show.
Yeah.
And so it started off with what I thought was just going to be a couple of people, and then very quickly mushroomed into about a dozen people that we ended up having a couple of live cohorts that we would take people on and basically train them to do every single step of the process. Let them put their names on anything that they touched, even if they, were only touching it a little bit, because so much of getting into the industry is having your name on some publishing credits. Like, you need to have your name attached to something that is doing well in the world. And at that time, Shelter in Place was starting to win awards, and, we had bigger download numbers and all of that stuff. And so, and then the final part of the process that we kind of concocted it was really, we were building the plane as we were flying it, because I didn't go into this thinking, oh, I'm going to teach narrative podcasting. But we started to really think about how can we, and when I say we, I'm talking about my husband, Nate. The two of us founded Narrative Podcast together. And he, like many people in the pandemic, got laid off pretty early on in the pandemic. So we went from, we thought we were sort of stable, to two people basically without any income, trying to figure out how to survive in the pandemic. And
with three small kids.
With three small children.
With three small children. Okay. No jobs.
This
three
is
small
the journey.
kids.
Yeah, no jobs.
Yeah.
This is the journey. Yeah. This is what builds resilience. Is, I'm a real life example of what I'm talking about with storytelling, of lots of messy middle in there and lots of hardship and revision of our lives. But I'm very grateful. So Nate has had a ton of experience helping people get jobs in a lot of industries and doing resume coaching. And so as we were sort of building this curriculum, we also looked at how can we help people get jobs in the industry. And we really thought through, okay, let's do practice interviews with them. Let's teach them how storytelling is really a part of it's part of writing a cover letter and part of the way that you present yourself in a job interview. And so we would do mock interviews with them. And that would be kind of the final step of, after they learned to build this thing, we teach them, okay, here's how you get a job. And then every single one of those people went on to get great jobs. And, at some really big places like the New York Times and Stitcher and Headspace, and, the list goes on and on. So that we were doing all of that, which was fantastic. And I loved it. And also, as you can imagine, 2 years of that, 200 episodes. And I did at some point clock the hours. And on average, I was spending somewhere between 40 and 80 hours a week doing that work. And often it was more like 80. So you can kind of imagine, if you're somebody who's ever worked those hours, I was pretty burnout by the time I got to spring of 2022, which is when Shelter in Place and those live cohorts wrapped up. And they wrapped up because I just needed a break. I was like, I got to take a couple months where I'm not making episodes. I'm not doing any live teaching. And it was at that time that I saw the job posting for Stanford. And it was like they had written the job post for me. It was uncanny. Like, I've never had that experience anywhere else, where I read it and I was like, I should probably at least apply for this, right? Because this seems like the way that they approach storytelling and podcasting. It's very holistic. It's so much more about, these are life skills. This is, the revision process works on you as you're making this thing. And that DNA of the Stanford Storytelling Project was very much like the narrative podcast DNA too. And it just felt like this perfect match. And so I applied for the job and got it, and have been doing that for the last 3 years. And now I'm also teaching with Stanford Continuing Studies, so like adult learners from all over the world. And also I teach classes at Google now on podcasting and storytelling, which has been really fun. And now writing a book about narrative podcasting, how to do this whole thing and how to have that revision process make your work beautiful and great and meaningful, and also work on yourself and hopefully help you to really find your voice as a creator in the world.
Absolutely. And Laura, what would you say is one key move or metric or even mindset that's made the biggest impact on, both your podcasting career and the careers of everybody you've worked with?
I think there's a lot, but I think the biggest one, and the reason why this is really at the heart of this book I'm writing, is that you have to approach this knowing that there's going to be a lot of ideation and change and revision and cutting and trimming and redoing to get to something really good.
Yeah.
There's a great little video floating around YouTube that it's some very crappy audio quality interview with Ira Glass, but somebody has, I don't know if you've seen this, but it's basically like a 1 minute video or maybe 2 minutes where he's talking about how as a creator, it takes a long time to get good. Like you have good taste in the beginning, but actually learning how to make the thing and become good at it takes a long time, and just doing it over and over again, getting back to that 10,000 hours idea.
Yeah.
And it's like if you Google Ira Glass good taste, that the video will come up, and it's great.
We'll pop the link here in the
And
show notes for everybody.
yeah,
Don't worry.
like I said, very bad quality of audio because somebody clearly just grabbed it from some old interview.
Mm,
But it's really good advice, and I think if you can go into this having that mindset from the get-go and not expecting it to all happen immediately. I think for most people when they start a new show,
man.
unless you're funded or unless you have a lot of backing from some other place, it's probably going to start small. You're probably going to press publish on this first however many episodes, and you're like, 2 people listened. It was my mom and my next door, whoever. But it, over time, if you're making good work,
Yeah.
that will actually pay off. And I'm a living example of this again, where Shelter in Place started very small. I think one of the reasons I felt the freedom to make the podcast the way I did is I really did not think anybody would listen. I was making that thing because I needed to make it at that time. And it was my creative lifeline so that I could show up for my kids and be my best self in the world. And I needed something creative to keep me going. Excuse me. I think that what's so interesting about the way that process happened for me is that because I wasn't thinking about downloads, I wasn't thinking about people caring about the work in the beginning. I just wanted it to be good work.
Yeah, you could
Over
focus
time,
on the good work.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I
totally.
really do think these are 2 different skill sets where there's the creator brain and there's like the editor, marketer, promoter brain. And if you try to bring those 2 things together, you're going to be depressed, you're going to be discouraged, you're going to feel like it's not good enough ever, and your work probably just won't be as good. And so something I teach students a lot where, whether it's at Stanford or Google or Narrative Podcasts, is make a distinction between the creator brain and the editor brain, and force yourself when you're creating, set a timer for 25 minutes or 5 minutes even, and say like, I'm not even allowing the editor brain or the promoter brain to show up in that time. I'm only focusing on creating. And then when you've created the thing, you can do the other thing. You can just focus on editing or promoting or whatever.
Yeah.
But trying to mix those 2 things, I think I fell into that eventually too, once I was learning more about like, oh, I got to get the work out in the world and all that. But if you make good work from the beginning, it will stand the test of time. And, here we are 3 years since I've put out an episode of Shelter in Place. I mean, we wrapped up at episode 200 and it's still in the top 1% globally, and I think that's because good work will stand the test of time, and it'll be something that people keep coming back to even after you stop putting new things out there. So I think that would be just like have the long game I think if you can have the long game and give yourself that gift, that's a really huge shift that you don't hear a lot in the industry, but I think it's important for being able to do this in the long term.
Absolutely. I think good work will always stand on its own.
Yeah.
Laura, what's something that people don't know about what you do?
Oh, I love this question so much. Probably a lot of things, but I think that something that I was just thinking about as you were asking me about the origin story is that a lot of what I do, and this has been true from the beginning, is connect with other people in the industry. And that usually actually doesn't show up publicly. I mean, it will with this book more because I'm consulting a lot of people in the industry who I love their work and I want to like spotlight their work as I'm talking about these different steps. But I think that if I look back at my journey, I can point to specific people and specific organization, like Air Media and Transom and then very specific people in the industry who befriended me very early on. Like somebody else that I think would be great to have in this show is Elaine Grant. I don't know if you know Elaine Appleton Grant, but she does the show Sound Judgment. And I think I met Elaine 1 month into making episodes of Shelter in Place, and we became friends. And now today, there's so many people I know because of that friendship. And, I could give you probably dozens of names of people like that who, I mean, you're one of those people who I connected because I was just interested in learning from that person, or I was excited about the work that they were doing. And then and I wasn't making those connections to advance myself. That wasn't the point because a lot of times it doesn't go anywhere. But I think if you can approach this work really with a spirit of community and wanting to just connect with people you admire and people who are doing good stuff in the world and who you could learn something from, or you could, give some gift to if you have something to offer them. I think that is something that I love doing. I will never get tired of connecting with people who are doing good work in the world and having those conversations about the industry and about the work we do, but also just about life. And I think the podcasting community is it's still the best place I've ever found in terms of just like exciting minds who are doing really cool work. And most of us are not in this because we want to get rich quick. Like most of us are in this because we just love that process of making something. And it's so fun. And, I think if I were just doing this in isolation, then I don't think it would have been the same experience. And I don't think I would have grown as much. I mean, there's just so many good people out there.
I think it's true in podcasting where there is such a big community aspect. And even if you're doing work, in a silo, right, on your own, just you and your mic, there's such a big community, whether it's your listeners and the community you create, or it's people who within the industry you can bounce things off of and create connections and share connections and help both them and yourself get to where you want to go and grow. It's one of the most incredible industries. We're all so collaborative. Well, Laura, if you had to start over today, what would you do differently to grow faster or smarter?
That is such a fantastic question. I think I would, in many ways, not do anything different on the podcasting front because I think that making those daily episodes and starting, I mean, it was literally day one of lockdown in the Bay Area. That was episode 1. And I think that actually for that particular podcast, for that moment in time, it needed to happen that way. I think if I'd waited even a week, I probably just would have lost the momentum.
Yeah.
So I think one answer to your question is, I think if you are feeling inspired to do something, act on that. But, or I should say, and if I were starting a podcast now, which, I have another one in the tank, it's coming out eventually here. It's just, I got to finish this book first and I've got a novel to finish first. And then my agent is also a podcasting agent. So the podcast will happen.
Fabulous.
But so I am thinking about your question, like now that I know what I know, I think one thing is really thinking about your platform in the book world, people talk a lot about platform, which is essentially like, who's your audience, who's following you. And I don't actually mean on social media. I think for some people that can be really important. But I think what I learned through Shelter in Place was that my listeners, that wasn't mostly where they were hanging out. Like, mostly these were people who were interested in a great story and in great writing and great production and sound quality and all of that. And so those people were much more likely to read a newsletter that I would send out that I'd really thoughtfully written and edited and all that, versus Instagram Reels or something. And again, I think it depends on your podcast. For some
for
shows,
sure.
that's going to be really important.
Yeah.
We found for Shelter in Place, there wasn't really much of a transfer from social media to listeners. Like, it was different people.
It was a different audience for sure. I always tell people you have to go where your audience is. You may have a Pinterest audience, you may have a LinkedIn audience.
Yep.
You'll most likely have a newsletter audience, Substack.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely audience specific. That makes heaps of sense.
So I think thinking about that even before your show is out there, and really thinking about what is it that you are offering your listeners that's going to be a gift to them, and not going at it from, I'm out here to promote myself and this work I'm doing, but really like, what am I creating that people are going to love, and that they'll be like, wow, I'm so glad that I spent my time listening to this thing. And you can start to give them a little bit of that in the work that you're doing, say if it's a newsletter or if it's a YouTube channel or, whatever it is. I think there's so many ways you can do this. But laying the foundation so that you already have people who are excited about the work that you're doing before you launch that show. And then when you do launch the show, having a runway where the trailer comes out first and you're asking people to, rate and review and listen and share with friends. And then when the podcast comes out, you've already kind of built this momentum. I think that was something that, because of the way Shelter in Place, my podcast, happened, there was no runway. It was literally like, I came up with the idea and the next day was episode 1. But it was such a weird time that I'm probably never
really
going to encounter that situation ever again.
Right. I think it speaks to that body of work. Yep. Absolutely. And it's something where, now
it's like a time capsule.
Exactly.
Right?
With a different show, you would do something different. But I think that's definitely something where it, you might have done it differently if you knew better or more at the time, but also it really speaks to the work that it was. Laura Joyce Davis, it has been incredible having you here on PodBiz. We always ask one last question. What are you most excited about coming up within the podcasting industry?
Oh, so many good questions, Norma Jean. I think something that has been really fun is, we haven't talked about AI at all in this conversation, but I'm actually, I have sort of like a healthy skepticism of AI, because I think on the one hand, there's real like climate change implications, at least with the way that things are being done right now with AI, that I think we need to be, as humans, wary of. At the same time, I do feel hopeful that we're moving toward a place where we can use AI to make our work, like the parts of our work that actually don't need the creative brain, the human brain, that we can speed those up. And I see all sorts of exciting ways that that's happening. And I feel like it's actually I know there are folks that are worried about being replaced by AI, but with podcasting and storytelling and narrative podcasting in particular, I don't worry about this, because I think AI actually serves as a really great, like, creative companion for ideation, trying to organize parts of the process that would maybe take you a long time, but AI can do very quickly. I think there's a lot to be excited about there. And also, great storytelling, I don't think is ever going to be replaced by AI, because what we're doing is not formulaic. What we're doing, this is why the heart of my book is that all of the magic is in the revision process, because there's some human work that you have to do there to make great stuff. And also, AI doesn't have to be completely excluded from that process. I have a friend at Stanford who is writing a novel, and he uses AI as like a thought partner to be like, okay, I want to build this world. What could I learn about out in the world that exists right now that I could draw from? And he uses, like Claude, I think he uses for that. And so I think there's real potential there for just making our worlds more expansive and imaginative because we have this ability to have, a pretty, like, AI is getting pretty smart at this point, like a pretty thoughtful, smart companion in that will push us to grow in ways that we might not on our own.
Absolutely. It's interesting. It reminds me of that movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett
Yes,
Johansson,
I love
where
that. Yeah,
he's a love letter writer, and she compiled his best ones and submitted it to a publisher, right? So she didn't write the letters.
Yes.
The AI, the Her, didn't write the letters,
Yep.
but she, kind of really was able to edit them in a way that made them marketable. And so it's interesting the way that
Yeah.
AI is going to be complementary to creativity moving forward. Absolutely.
Yeah, I just got a really lovely email from one of my Stanford students just last night, and he said, I really appreciated your class because there's so much talk about AI and cheating in universities right now. And he's like, your class was the one class where I really couldn't, like, I had to do the work myself. I couldn't use
Yeah.
ChatGPT to come up with things because what we were doing was too complex, and it was really hard, but it was really good. And I love that perspective so much. I think it's true.
Absolutely. Well, Laura Joyce Davis, CEO of Narrative Podcasts and managing editor at the Stanford Storytelling Project. Thanks for joining us here on PodBiz.
Thanks so much for having me, Norma Jean. This has been so fun.